and welcome to part 5 of PiaVindex, War and Decolonization. Here, we're going to look at the Vietnam's episode in Ulrich's life, basically, when he returns to Vietnam in 1965. The full book, historical fiction, PiaVindex War and Decolonization, is available from most reputable online retailers. In 1965, the North Vietnamese were putting increasing pressure on South Vietnam and using the Ho Chi Minh Trail to transport supplies and troops down towards South Vietnam, and in particular the highlands around Kon Tum and Pleiku. In fact, by October 1965, the USA was heavily committed in Vietnam, and it was in that autumn period that the first major conflagration occurred. It kicked off this battle with the 32nd Regiment of the North Vietnamese who were attacking the American Special Forces camp at Plei Mai. The plan of the North Vietnamese was for 32nd PiaVin Regiment to ambush ARVin, or South Vietnamese Reinforcement Rescue columns sent to relieve the camp. But the United States, using air support, severely crippled the 33rd PiaVin Regiment. The North Vietnamese remnants retreated westward into the Ia Drang Valley, a river valley, 37 to 38 miles west of Pleiku, bordering on the Cambodian border and the associated Ho Chi Minh Trail. On November the 14th, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Moore, with the 1st Battalion of the 7th Cavalry Regiment, the 1st Cavalry Division, investigate this valley looking for the enemy. And Moore lands with the first wave of 16 helicopters, 90 troops at landing zone X-ray near the base of the Chu Pong Massif. They pretty soon capture a boy soldier who informs Moore that 2 to 3 PiaVin, or People's Army of North Vietnam regiments, are on the mountain, and it's not long after that battle begins at landing zone X-ray. Here we have a map of the Battle of Ia Drang, where you can see the arrival of the Americans by helicopter, air mobile to the X-ray landing zone at the bottom of Chu Pong Mountain there, and the ensuing battle there, and its location in central Vietnam. These are pictures of the fight, the 1st 7th Cavalry disembarking from a Huey helicopter at landing zone X-ray during the Battle of Ia Drang, and firefighting going on, the initial contact with the enemy. You can see by that evening, Colonel Moore and his troops were surrounded by the PiaVin forces, pretty much surrounded, and the situation was not looking good, but they managed to hold off. The next morning, very early that morning, reinforcements arrive from fire bases Victor, the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Cavalry, to relieve Colonel Moore, and the overall picture of the battle is shown in this diagram here. You can see that on the landing zone X-ray, the arrival of the 1st Regiment of the 7th Cavalry, and then the subsequent holdout there with the American B-52 strikes on the mountains of where the enemy was sheltering, where the North Vietnamese were sheltering, and then the landing zone was evacuated a few days later. And in that evacuation, some of the troops went back on foot towards the landing zone Albany, but they were attacked by or ambushed by the North Vietnamese, and that led to further fatalities. So on the 17th of November 1965, the 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry, and the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, and 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry marched out of landing zone X-ray, and the 2nd Battalion of the 7th Cavalry and the 1st Battalion of the 5th Cavalry head for landing zone Albany. Now, during that march, the columns were strung out, and two prisoners were, and they halted in the bush because two prisoners were captured and interrogated. And they didn't realize that Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen Hu An's 66th PiaVin Regiment was resting up nearby in the jungle, and the PiaVin attacked with mortars and sniper fire. There was a 6-hour bitter firefight. 155 Americans were killed and 120 wounded, many by friendly fire from artillery and napalm airstrikes. And so overall, with these two battle locations at landing zone X-ray and landing zone Albany, 234 Americans were killed in action and 250 wounded. But during the entire 43-day Ia Drang Campaign, over 500 Americans were killed. But the enemy's casualties or mortality rate was estimated at 3,561. These great losses sustained by the North Vietnamese clearly demonstrated the communist determination to fight. At this point in time, 2 US service members remain unaccounted for from the Battle of Ia Drang. Specialist Jerry Allen Heimer from the US Army, who was lost on the first day of the battle when his unit was ambushed near landing zone Albany, and Captain Paul Truman McClellan, Jr., US Air Force, who was lost on the same day, 14th of November, when his Skyraider was shot down. Now, the other aspect of that, in the book, Ulrich, not only as a reporter, because remember at this stage in the novel he's become a reporter and is no longer in the French army, and is reporting after his sojourn in Cameroon, he's reporting on the Vietnam War, and as well as covering the Ia Drang battle, he covers the engagement of Australian troops in the campaign there. The Americans at the time were based at Nui Dat, that was their main base, near Long Tan, Vietnam, in the south of the country, not far from Saigon. There you can see their base actually there to the east of Saigon there. Bien Ho is north of Saigon. And there you see the location, Long Tan, which is north of Dat Do. Now, the major engagement of the Australians, involving the Australians, occurred in 1966, August 1966. So this was, roughly speaking, 9 months after the landing X-ray encounter in '65. In this particular firefight, the Viet Cong, remember Viet Cong were the local forces as opposed to the PiaVin or regular forces of North Vietnam. As well as the PiaVin forces were engaged against the Australian task force elements, and in particular the 6th RAR Royal Australian Regiment. What happened basically on the night of the 16th to 17th August, the VC and North Vietnamese attacked Nui Dat from a position about 2 kilometers east of the base. And that in the morning of the 17th of August, D Company 6th Battalion RAR searched for these firing positions. And during a couple of days later, during this sort of search patrols in the afternoon of the 18th of August, there is contact with VC elements. D Company makes contact. The VC or enemy attempt to encircle and overrun the Australians, and they're almost succeeded, but luckily despite the heavy rain, at 1800, 2 Iroquois helicopters from number 9 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force, managed to resupply the troops with water and ammunition and to keep them going. And also, what was another instrumental in the Australian victory during this encounter, was strong artillery fire from the New Zealand artillery, if memory serves, who helped D Company hold the line before a relief force of M113 armored personnel carriers and infantry from Nui Dat. Now, the backdrop to all of this was the Australian intel picked up movement of the 275 VC regiment radio transmitter towards Nui Dat in August, sort of July, August, end of July, August. So you can see the VCs moving from their base area in the east, moving across and heading towards Nui Dat during the early August period. So they knew that something was going on there, basically, or about to explode. Here is a visual representation from the movie that was made of the battle, Australian infantry. And here is a detailed map of the exact encounter, where you can see from the base at Nui Dat, the patrol went out towards the east into the rubber plantation to investigate the rubber plantation. And while they were there, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong attacked their position. On the day after the battle, so the Australians managed to hold out due to this helicopter resupply largely, and also their own heroism. After the battle, the 6th RAR recovered 2 wounded Australians. However, one said that during the battle, an NCO, non-commissioned officer, despite knowing he was wounded, ignored his plight and scurried off shouting, "Every man for himself." So although there was generally what the Aussies fought well, there was question marks about some of them in some instances. Yeah. So in short, this particular battle, you can say the 108 men of Delta Company, 6 RAR, engaged the main force of VC, approximately 2,000 to 2,500 soldiers. Unfortunately, 18 Australians were killed in action, 17 from Delta Company, 6 RAR, and one from one APC squadron who died from his wounds 9 days after the battle. The official body count for the North Vietnamese or the communists was 245 killed. However, even though additional body and body parts were found over the following days and weeks, the number of 245 has remained the official recorded casualty figure. There's no official record of how many communists were wounded in the battle, but at least 2 to 800, in the range of 2 to 800. Only 3 wounded Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army personnel were taken prisoner on the battlefield. What's worth pointing out is that the Australians were dependent on American helicopters for air mobility. In fact, the US used nearly 12,000 helicopters in the Vietnam War, but what's remarkably, 5,000 were destroyed. In fact, helicopter pilot was one of the most dangerous jobs of the war. In the novel, Ishtari is still piloting for the military, in this case the Americans. In fact, she's taking the wounded from the Kon Tum air mobile base, to the 8th Field Hospital at Nha Trang, the wounded. And in one of those missions, she tragically is very severely wounded when a rocket goes through her perspex of the helicopter, and she's severely burnt and taken to the hospital. But there, where Penelope is now a major trauma surgeon, Ulrich visits, and both of them are shocked by the state of Ishtari, and Penelope administers morphine to basically as a mercy killing to the pilot. Here we have an image of a medevac evacuation in difficult circumstances during the war. And this are the movements that Ulrich, in his role as a journalist, undertakes in 1965, 66. So you've got the movement between Kon Tum base in the north there, An Khe, I beg your pardon, no, An Khe, the main helicopter base of the Air Mobile Forces at Camp Radcliffe, and the movement to Nui Dat down there on the in the south east there, as well as the journey to Dak Son, the camp where Ulrich discovers Cassandra is working with the hill tribes. At Dak Son, Cassandra was subsequently killed. Ulrich meets with her and discovers the whereabouts of Zigethius. But by the time Ulrich's gone back to the United States, the VC the North Vietnamese, the communists carry out an attack to massacre the Montagnards in Dak Son on the 5th of the 12th, 1967. After midnight on that day, the VC machine gun, mortar and rocket the settlement, and then at dawn 2 battalions of VC storm it and use 60 flamethrowers to burn to death or shoot 252 men, women and children. They kidnap 100 survivors that are used as slaves virtually by the North Vietnamese. And in fact, at the end of this slaughter and atrocities, 500 other Montagnards, as well as those whose bodies are found, are missing, presumed dead. So you could ask, why were the communists so against the Montagnards? Because they wanted to impose a fear to prevent them defecting and working with the Americans. back in America, Ulrich there discovers the whereabouts of Zigethius, now informed by Cassandra's confession and revelations, I should say. And Ulrich remorselessly tracks down the ex-Nazi, now working for the American rocket program, and kidnaps him. And after torturing him and draining his blood, dumps the body in the Mississippi River as revenge for the murder of his friend Agamemnon during the Second World War, as we saw in the earlier episode of the novel, in the earlier part of the novel. For those interested in further resources involving the Vietnam War, there is some eclectic example there, which provides some backdrop enrichment, particular on the Moore and Galloway, their book, which became a movie, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, which gives a very detailed account of the Ia Drang battle. And then another thing to point out is Burns and Novak's famous film on the Vietnam War, by Florentine Films. But anyway, there's some information. Thank you so much for your attention. A reminder that the novel is available for those who are interested in a more in the written format of this work. Thank you so much.